The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for the third time. 22 years he had served the crown, and never once had he wavered in his duty. His weathered hands gripped the ceremonial spear with practiced ease, the same spear his father had carried before him in service to the royal family. Today felt different, though. There was tension in the air that even the morning birds seemed to sense, their usual cheerful songs replaced by cautious chirping. Thomas had been assigned to guard the private entrance to the Queen's study, a position of highest trust that spoke volumes about his reputation within the royal guard. The Queen had specific instructions for the day. No interruptions whatsoever. She was meeting with senior advisors about matters of state that required absolute privacy. The weight of this responsibility sat heavily on Thomas's shoulders as he took his position beside the ornate wooden door, its brass fittings gleaming in the morning light. As the clock tower chimed 9 o'clock, Thomas noticed unusual activity in the corridors. Staff members hurried past with worried expressions, whispering among themselves in hushed tones. Something was happening, but his training had taught him to focus solely on his immediate duty. The door behind him remained firmly closed, and he would ensure it stayed that way until the Queen herself gave him leave. The castle felt alive with nervous energy. Footsteps echoed through the marble hallways with unusual urgency. Thomas could hear muffled conversations coming from various rooms, but none of it mattered to him. His world had narrowed to the space immediately around the door he was protecting. Every muscle in his body was alert, every sense tuned to potential threats or disturbances. Around 10:30, he noticed Camilla, the Queen consort, approaching from the east wing. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. Thomas had always respected her position, but today his orders were crystal clear. No one meant no one, regardless of their title or relationship to the crown. Her lady-in-waiting followed a few steps behind, carrying what appeared to be important documents. Thomas could see the determination in Camilla's eyes as she drew closer. This was going to be a test of his resolve, and he steeled himself for what was to come. The Queen consort had always been gracious in her interactions with the staff, but Thomas sensed this encounter would be different. She approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened and paths cleared. Her elegant dress rustled softly as she moved, and Thomas could smell her subtle perfume as she came within speaking distance. When she was perhaps 10 feet away, Thomas stepped forward slightly, his spear moving in a barely perceptible gesture that spoke volumes. It was a movement so subtle that most would miss it, but those familiar with royal protocol would understand its meaning immediately. He was preparing to fulfill his duty, regardless of who might challenge it. The morning light streaming through the tall windows created an almost theatrical atmosphere as these two representatives of different aspects of royal service prepared for their confrontation. Thomas represented the old guard, the unwavering dedication to orders and protocol that had protected the monarchy for centuries. Camilla represented the modern royal family, adaptive and engaged with contemporary challenges. As she continued her approach, Thomas could see the slight surprise in her expression. Perhaps she had expected him to step aside automatically, as guards often did when members of the royal family approached. But today was different, and Thomas was about to make that very clear. The tension in the corridor was palpable as other staff members began to take notice of the developing situation. Some slowed their pace, sensing drama, while others hurried past more quickly, not wanting to be caught witnessing a confrontation between a senior guard and the Queen consort. Thomas's training kicked in as he assessed the situation. His primary loyalty was to his direct orders from the Queen herself. Everything else, including courtesy to other members of the royal family, came secondary to that fundamental duty. This was the moment that would define not just his career, but his legacy as a royal guard. The castle walls seemed to hold their breath as Camilla drew within conversational distance. Thomas could see the documents in her lady-in-waiting's hands more clearly now. They appeared to be official papers, possibly related to whatever urgent matter had brought her here. But regardless of their importance, his orders remained unchanged. Years of military training had prepared him for moments like this. The ability to stand firm in the face of authority, to maintain discipline even when it became uncomfortable, was what separated true guardsmen from mere soldiers. Thomas felt the weight of tradition and duty flowing through him as he prepared to speak. The ornate hallway, with its portraits of past monarchs watching from gilded frames, seemed to approve of his stance. These walls had witnessed countless moments of protocol and tradition being upheld, often at personal cost, to those sworn to protect the crown. Today would be another such moment. As Camilla came to within 5 feet of the door, Thomas knew the moment of truth had arrived. His voice, when he spoke, would need to carry both respect for her position and absolute certainty about his own duty. The words he chose would echo through the castle corridors for days to come, becoming part of the ongoing story of royal protocol and the guards who protected it. The queen consort's expression showed a mixture of surprise and determination as she realized this guard was not going to simply step aside. Thomas could see her mind working, perhaps calculating whether to press forward or seek another approach, but he knew that his duty was clear, and nothing would shake his resolve. In that frozen moment before words were spoken, the weight of centuries of royal tradition seemed to rest on Thomas's shoulders. He was about to become part of the long history of guardsmen who had put duty before convenience, protocol before politics, and royal orders above all other considerations. Thomas cleared his throat, the sound echoing slightly in the marble corridor. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying the respectful but firm tone he had perfected over 2 decades of service. "I must respectfully inform you that Her Majesty the Queen has given strict instructions that she is not to be disturbed under any circumstances this morning." Camilla paused, clearly taken aback by this unexpected obstacle. Her eyebrows rose slightly, and Thomas could see her processing this unprecedented situation. In her years as queen consort, doors had always opened, paths had always cleared. The very notion that a guard would deny her access seemed almost foreign to her experience. "Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise mixed with authority, "I need to speak with the Queen immediately. This is a matter of considerable urgency." She gestured toward the documents her lady-in-waiting carried. "These papers require her immediate attention." Thomas remained unmoved, his posture straight and professional. He had faced down drunken protesters, aggressive photographers, and even foreign dignitaries who had tried to breach protocol. This was simply another test of his resolve, albeit a more delicate one, given the person making the request. "I understand the urgency, Your Majesty," Thomas replied, his tone never wavering from respectful firmness. "However, my orders from the Queen herself were quite explicit. She emphasized that no one, regardless of position or urgency of business, was to interrupt her this morning." The lady-in-waiting shifted nervously behind Camilla, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing this standoff. Thomas could see other staff members had begun to gather at a respectful distance, sensing the unusual nature of what was unfolding. Word of such confrontations traveled quickly through the castle's network of servants and officials. Camilla's expression hardened slightly. She was not accustomed to being denied, and Thomas could see her mind working through her options. Would she attempt to go around him? Would she invoke her authority more forcefully? Would she send for someone of higher rank to override his position? "Sergeant," she said, taking a step closer, "I believe you may be misunderstanding the nature of protocol here. As queen consort, I have access to all areas of the palace when matters of state require it." Thomas felt his grip tighten almost imperceptibly on his spear. This was the moment he had been trained for throughout his career, when duty and authority came into direct conflict, when the chain of command became blurred by competing loyalties and obligations. His father had told him stories of similar moments, tests of character that defined a guardsman's entire career. "Your Majesty," Thomas said, his voice growing slightly more firm while maintaining its respectful tone, "I fully understand your position and authority. However, my direct orders from Her Majesty the Queen take precedence over all other considerations. I have sworn an oath to follow those orders, and I intend to honor that oath." The corridor had grown quieter, as if the very walls were listening to this exchange. Even the usual sounds of the castle seemed muted, creating an atmosphere where every word carried extra weight. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat steady and strong as he maintained his position. Camilla's face showed a flash of frustration, quickly controlled but not entirely hidden. She was clearly not used to such resistance, especially from someone she would normally consider subordinate to her authority. The documents in her lady-in-waiting's hands seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment of delay. "The matters I need to discuss with the Queen directly affect the crown," she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Surely you understand that such concerns override standard protocol. Thomas had anticipated this line of argument. In his years of service, he had learned that everyone believed their particular concern was the exception that justified breaking protocol. But protocol existed precisely because exceptions, once made, had a way of multiplying until they destroyed the very system they were meant to protect. I am certain they are matters of great importance, Your Majesty, Thomas replied. However, the Queen was very specific about the importance of her current meeting and the need for absolute privacy. She indicated that all other business, no matter how urgent it might seem, should wait until she emerges. The standoff continued, with neither party willing to give ground. Thomas could see Camilla calculating her next move, perhaps weighing the political implications of forcing past a guard versus the urgency of whatever business had brought her here. The lady-in-waiting behind her looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to her mistress and awareness of the delicate nature of the situation. Other royal staff had begun to take notice of the unusual scene. Thomas could sense their presence without turning his head, their nervous energy adding to the tension that already filled the corridor. This was the kind of incident that would be discussed in servants' quarters for months to come, analyzed and debated from every angle. The Queen Consort took another step forward, bringing her within arm's reach of Thomas. He could see the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw that suggested she was not accustomed to backing down from challenges. This close, he could also see a hint of genuine concern in her expression, suggesting that whatever business had brought her here was indeed urgent in her mind. "Sergeant," she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "I am not asking you to abandon your duty. I am simply asking you to recognize that some situations require flexibility in the application of protocol. The Queen would want to know about these matters immediately." Thomas felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Here was a member of the royal family, someone he had sworn to protect and serve, asking him to step aside. Every instinct of courtesy and deference urged him to comply. But stronger than those instincts was his oath, his duty, and the explicit instructions he had received that morning. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "I appreciate your position, and I do not doubt the importance of your business. But I have my orders, and those orders are clear. I cannot and will not allow anyone to pass this point until the Queen herself gives me leave to do so." The silence that followed his words seemed to stretch endlessly. Camilla's expression showed surprise, frustration, and perhaps a grudging respect for his unwavering stance. The lady-in-waiting clutched her documents more tightly, as if they might provide some solution to this impasse. Thomas stood firm, his spear held at the ready, his body positioned to make clear that the corridor beyond this point was forbidden territory. The morning light had shifted slightly, casting different shadows across the floor, but his resolve remained as solid as the stone walls around them. The tension in the corridor reached its peak as Camilla made a move to step around Thomas. Without hesitation, he shifted his position, bringing his ceremonial spear across in a decisive blocking motion. The polished metal caught the light from the tall windows, creating a flash that seemed to illuminate the gravity of the moment. "Your Majesty," Thomas said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position and training, "I must ask you to stop. Not even the Queen can cross this line without my permission while I am under these orders." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Camilla froze mid-step, her eyes widening in genuine shock. In all her years as part of the royal family, no one had ever spoken to her with such direct authority. The lady-in-waiting behind her gasped audibly, her hands flying to cover her mouth as if she could somehow take back what she had witnessed. Thomas felt a surge of adrenaline course through his body, but his training kept him steady. He had just invoked one of the most sacred principles of royal protection. When a guard was under direct orders from the monarch, those orders superseded all other authority within the palace. It was a rarely used protocol, but it was absolute and unquestionable. The small crowd of staff members that had gathered at a respectful distance seemed to collectively hold their breath. They were witnessing something unprecedented in the modern royal household. Stories like this would become legend among the castle workers, passed down from one generation of servants to the next. Camilla's shock quickly transformed into something between outrage and disbelief. Her face flushed slightly, and Thomas could see her hands trembling with emotion. She was clearly struggling to process not just the denial of access, but the manner in which it had been delivered. "How dare you?" she said, her voice rising above the respectful whisper that usually characterized palace conversations. "Do you have any idea who you are speaking to? I am the queen consort of this realm, and I will not be blocked by a mere guard." Thomas felt the weight of centuries of tradition behind his next words. His voice remained steady and respectful, but carried an unmistakable note of finality. "Your Majesty, I am deeply aware of your position, and I mean no disrespect to your person. However, I am under direct orders from Her Majesty the Queen herself. In this moment, in this place, those orders make my authority absolute." The corridor seemed to spin around them as the implications of this standoff became clear. This was no longer simply about access to a room. It had become a test of the fundamental principles that governed the royal household. Thomas represented the old system of absolute duty and unquestioning obedience to direct orders. Camilla represented the modern expectation of flexibility and accommodation. Other members of the royal staff began to appear from various directions, drawn by the unusual commotion. A senior butler approached cautiously, clearly hoping to find some way to defuse the situation without taking sides. Two junior guards appeared at the far end of the corridor, unsure whether to approach or maintain their distance. Camilla's lady-in-waiting stepped forward tentatively. "Perhaps," she suggested in a whisper, "we could send word to the Queen through the door, just to inform her of the urgency?" Thomas shook his head firmly. "My orders were explicit. No interruptions of any kind. That includes messages, notes, or any form of communication." His eyes never left Camilla's face as he spoke, making clear that his determination was unwavering. The queen consort began to pace in the small space available to her, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Thomas could see her mind working, perhaps searching for some angle or authority that could override his position. But royal protocol was ancient and well-established. When a guard was under direct orders from the monarch, those orders created an invisible but unbreachable barrier. "This is ridiculous," Camilla said, her voice carrying frustration and disbelief in equal measure. "The Queen would want to know about these matters. You are actually working against her interests by preventing me from reaching her." Thomas had heard similar arguments many times in his career. Every person who had ever been denied access believed their particular situation was the exception that justified breaking protocol. But he had learned long ago that protocol existed precisely because exceptions had a way of destroying the very systems they were meant to protect. "Your Majesty," he replied calmly, "I trust the Queen's judgment completely. When she gave me these orders, she was fully aware of their implications. If she believed any matter could be urgent enough to warrant interruption, she would have made provisions for that in her instructions." The standoff continued as more palace staff began to gather at respectable distances, creating an audience for this unprecedented confrontation. Thomas could feel their eyes on him, some supportive, others probably thinking he had gone too far. But his conscience was clear. He was doing exactly what he had been trained and ordered to do. Camilla suddenly stopped pacing and turned to face him directly. "Sergeant," she said, her voice taking on a different quality more personal than royal, "I am asking you, as someone who has served this family faithfully for over 20 years, to show some flexibility here. The documents I carry affect the security of the realm." For just a moment, Thomas felt his resolve waver. The personal appeal, the acknowledgement of his years of service, the mention of national security, all of these struck at his deepest loyalties. But then he remembered the Queen's face when she had given him his orders that morning. The seriousness in her voice, the emphasis she had placed on the absolute nature of her instructions. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its firmness, "I am honored by your acknowledgement of my service. But that very service has taught me that duty sometimes requires us to make difficult choices. My duty today is clear, and I will not abandon it, regardless of the personal cost." The lady-in-waiting clutched her documents so tightly that Thomas could see her knuckles whitening. The senior butler who had approached earlier stood frozen, clearly wanting to help but unable to find any protocol that could resolve this impasse. The junior guards at the end of the corridor remained at attention, professional enough to avoid taking sides in a matter involving such high-ranking individuals. Thomas could see Camilla's frustration reaching a boiling point. Her usual composure was cracking under the strain of this unexpected resistance. She had always been able to rely on her position and authority to open doors and smooth paths. This complete denial of that authority was clearly foreign to her experience. The morning sun had shifted position, casting new patterns of light and shadow across the marble floor between them. But the fundamental standoff remained unchanged, an immovable guard protecting his orders against an unstoppable force of royal authority. Something would have to give, but Thomas was determined it would not be his resolve. The confrontation reached a new level when Camilla suddenly stepped forward with determination, clearly intending to push past Thomas despite his warnings. In one fluid motion, developed through years of training, Thomas planted his spear firmly on the marble floor and positioned himself squarely in her path. "Your Majesty, I am ordering you to stop," he said, his voice now carrying the full weight of military authority. "I will use whatever force necessary to prevent anyone from passing this point." The words created a shockwave through the gathered observers. A collective gasp echoed through the corridor as everyone present realized they were witnessing something that would go down in palace history. Never before had anyone seen a royal guard directly threaten to use force against a member of the royal family. Camilla stopped dead in her tracks, her face pale with shock. The very notion that someone would physically prevent her from going where she chose was so foreign to her experience that she seemed unable to process it initially. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out as she stared at the determined guard blocking her path. The lady-in-waiting dropped one of her documents, the papers scattering across the polished floor with a rustling sound that seemed amplified in the tense silence. She scrambled to collect them, her hands shaking as she tried to maintain some semblance of dignity while witnessing this unprecedented confrontation. Thomas stood like a statue, his spear positioned defensively but unmistakably ready for use if necessary. Every muscle in his body was coiled with professional readiness. His face showed no emotion beyond stern determination, but inside, his heart was pounding with the magnitude of what he was doing. The senior butler finally found his voice. "Perhaps," he said tentatively, "we should summon the Lord Chamberlain to resolve this matter." His suggestion hung in the air like a lifeline, offering a potential way out of a situation that seemed to have no good resolution. "No," Thomas said firmly, not taking his eyes off Camilla. "My orders came directly from the Queen. No one below her rank has the authority to override them." His words were like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through the gathered crowd. Camilla finally found her voice again, though it trembled with emotion. "This is beyond acceptable," she said, her usual composed demeanor completely shattered. "You are threatening a member of the royal family. This will have consequences, Sergeant. Serious consequences." Thomas had expected this threat, and he was prepared for it. Throughout his career, he had seen other guards face similar moments of choice between immediate comfort and long-term duty. Those who chose duty sometimes faced temporary consequences, but they always earned lasting respect. "I understand, Your Majesty," he replied calmly. "I accept whatever consequences my actions may bring, but I will not abandon my duty, no matter the personal cost." The corridor had filled with more observers now, creating an audience for this historic confrontation. Senior palace staff, junior servants, and even some visiting officials had been drawn by the commotion. All stood at respectful distances, but their presence added weight to the moment. Among the crowd, Thomas noticed several other guards watching the proceedings. He could see a mixture of admiration and concern in their faces. They understood the position he was in, the impossible choice between competing loyalties that every guardsman dreaded but knew might one day face. Camilla began to pace again, her movements sharp and agitated. "The documents I carry," she said, her voice rising, "concern threats to the royal family. By preventing me from delivering them, you may be endangering the very people you have sworn to protect." This argument struck closer to Thomas's core concerns than any previous appeal. The protection of the royal family was indeed his primary duty, the foundation of everything he had trained for. But his experience had taught him to be skeptical of claims that every urgent matter was truly a matter of life and death. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "if there were genuine threats requiring immediate action, the proper channels would have been used. Emergency protocols exist for exactly such situations. The fact that those protocols were not invoked suggests that this matter, while important, is not of immediate physical danger." His reasoning was sound, based on years of experience with actual security threats. True emergencies followed established patterns and procedures. Whatever Camilla's business was, it did not bear the hallmarks of a genuine security crisis. The queen consort stopped pacing and turned to face him with a look of pure frustration. "You are making assumptions about matters you know nothing about," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "How dare you presume to judge the importance of royal business?" Thomas felt the weight of her criticism, but his resolve remained firm. "I am not judging the importance of your business, Your Majesty. I am simply following my orders." The queen, in her wisdom, anticipated that various urgent matters might arise, and she chose to prioritize her current meeting above all other concerns. The standoff had now lasted nearly 30 minutes, creating a situation that neither party had anticipated. Thomas's legs ached from maintaining his rigid stance, but he showed no signs of fatigue. His military training had prepared him for far more challenging endurance tests. Several members of the gathered crowd began to whisper among themselves, speculating about the ultimate resolution of this crisis. Some suggested that eventually someone of sufficient authority would arrive to sort things out. Others wondered if Camilla would eventually give up and return later. A few even speculated that the queen herself might emerge from her meeting. The lady-in-waiting had finally collected all her scattered documents and now stood uncertainly behind Camilla, clearly wishing she were anywhere else in the world. Her position as a witness to this confrontation was deeply uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to her mistress and awareness that she was watching something that challenged the very foundations of palace protocol. Thomas could see that Camilla was reaching the limits of her patience. Her face was flushed with anger and frustration, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The composed, dignified royal persona that she usually maintained had been completely stripped away by this unprecedented resistance to her authority. "This conversation is over," she declared suddenly. "I am going to see the queen, and you will step aside immediately." But Thomas remained unmoved, his spear still planted firmly across her path. "I cannot allow that, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "My orders remain in effect." The moment had arrived when one of them would have to completely back down, or the confrontation would escalate to a level that no one in the palace had ever witnessed before. The very air seemed to crackle with tension as everyone present held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Thomas prepared himself for whatever was to come, his grip firm on his spear, his body ready to fulfill his duty regardless of the consequences. In his mind, he could hear his father's voice reminding him that a guard's honor was more valuable than comfort, promotion, or even personal safety. Just as the confrontation seemed about to reach a breaking point, the heavy oak door behind Thomas opened with a gentle creak. The queen herself appeared in the doorway, having apparently heard the commotion in the corridor. Her presence immediately transformed the atmosphere, bringing a sense of calm authority that made everyone present remember their proper places. "What exactly is happening here?" the queen asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect for decades. Her eyes swept across the scene, taking in Camilla's flushed face, Thomas's rigid stance, and the crowd of observers that had gathered. Thomas immediately turned to face his sovereign, snapping to attention with military precision. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying relief and continued determination, "I have been following your explicit instructions to prevent any interruptions to your meeting. The Queen Consort has been attempting to gain access, but I have maintained your orders as given." The Queen's expression remained neutral as she processed this information. She looked at Camilla, then back at Thomas, clearly understanding the full implications of what had transpired. The corridor fell silent as everyone waited for her response to this unprecedented situation. "Sergeant Mitchell," the Queen said, using his full name with formal recognition, "you have followed your orders exactly as given. Your duty today has been exemplary." Her words carried across the corridor, reaching every ear and making clear her complete support for her guard's actions. Camilla's face showed a mixture of emotions: surprise, vindication for her urgency, but also perhaps a dawning realization of how the situation had escalated. "Your Majesty," she began, "the documents I carry require your immediate attention. They concern matters of significant importance to the crown." The Queen nodded thoughtfully, but her next words surprised everyone present. "Camilla, I appreciate your dedication to these matters. However, My instructions to Sergeant Mitchell were given after careful consideration of all pending business. The meeting I was conducting could not be interrupted, not even for matters that might seem urgent. She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. What you have witnessed here today is the Royal Guard functioning exactly as it should. When I give an order, I expect it to be followed completely, regardless of who might request exceptions. Thomas felt a surge of validation flow through him. The Queen's public support for his actions would echo through the palace for years to come, establishing a precedent that would guide future guards in similar situations. His reputation, rather than being damaged by this confrontation, had been enhanced by his unwavering adherence to duty. The gathered crowd began to slowly disperse, understanding that the dramatic confrontation had reached its conclusion. Staff members returned to their duties, though Thomas knew this story would be told and retold throughout the palace for generations to come. Camilla's lady-in-waiting stepped forward with the documents, which the Queen accepted with gracious dignity. "I will review these immediately," the Queen assured her. However, the proper procedure would have been to submit them through the appropriate channels and wait for a suitable time for discussion. The Queen then turned her attention back to Thomas. "Sergeant, you have demonstrated today why the Royal Guard has earned its reputation over centuries of faithful service. Your commitment to duty, even in the face of difficult circumstances, represents the very best of your calling." Thomas felt pride swell in his chest, but maintained his professional demeanor. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I serve at your pleasure and follow your orders without question." "Indeed you do," the Queen replied with a slight smile. "And that is exactly how it should be." As the immediate tension of the confrontation began to fade, Thomas noticed the respect in the eyes of his fellow guards who had witnessed the events. They had seen one of their own tested in the most challenging way possible, and emerge with his honor intact and his duty fulfilled. The Queen gestured for Camilla to join her in the study to review the urgent documents. As they moved toward the door, Camilla paused beside Thomas. For a moment, he wondered if she might express anger or resentment for his actions. Instead, she spoke quietly, her voice carrying a note of grudging respect. "Sergeant, while I disagreed with your actions in the moment, I can see now that you were simply doing your duty as you understood it. That kind of dedication, while frustrating when it blocks one's path, is ultimately what protects this institution." Thomas inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I meant no personal disrespect, only faithful service to my orders." As the Queen and Camilla disappeared into the study, Thomas resumed his position by the door. The corridor gradually returned to its normal state of quiet activity, but something fundamental had changed. Every person who had witnessed the confrontation now understood more clearly the principles that governed palace life. The afternoon sun cast different shadows than the morning light had, but Thomas's commitment remained as constant as the stones of the castle itself. He had faced the ultimate test of a royal guard's loyalty and emerged with his honor enhanced rather than diminished. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the palace's informal networks. By evening, every guard, servant, and official had heard some version of the story. In each telling, Thomas's unwavering commitment to his orders became the central theme, establishing him as a model of professional dedication. Later that day, when Thomas was finally relieved of his duty, he walked through the castle corridors with his head held high. He had proven that the ancient traditions of the Royal Guard remained strong in the modern world. No matter how circumstances might change, no matter what pressures might be applied, duty would always come first. His father's voice seemed to echo in his memory as he made his way home. A guard's worth is measured not by the easy moments, but by how he stands when standing becomes difficult. Today, Thomas had measured up to that standard completely. The confrontation became part of palace lore, referenced whenever questions arose about the proper limits of authority and duty. Thomas's actions that day established a precedent that would guide royal guards for generations to come, proving that true service sometimes required the courage to say no, even to those accustomed to hearing yes. In the end, both the Queen and Camilla had been served well by a guard who understood that the highest form of respect sometimes looked like resistance, and that the greatest service to the crown came through unwavering adherence to royal orders, no matter the personal cost or temporary discomfort that such dedication might cause.